I'm sure by now you've heard that there's been major updates to the H-1B visa program that has come out from the Trump administration recently in order to crack down on companies who are taking advantage of the system. And if you didn't think it was a big deal, you probably need to think again, because I've dug into this a little bit more, and the scam is real and it's worse than you actually think. Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Brian. I'm a corporate recruiter and HR professional, and I've made it my mission to demystify how companies hire and how careers work at major corporations. So if this kind of content interests you, make sure you hit the subscribe button. You may also want to hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future content. And if you're tired of employers holding all of the cards in the employment arrangement, isn't it time that you reclaim control in your career and start to flip the script? And if you're not sure how to do that, I've created a free webinar which walks you through step by step exactly what it is that you need to do so that you can position yourself to have a stronger job search and actually be in demand in your career. And I break it down in this webinar. So if you're interested in getting started, I will leave a link in the comments below. Now, obviously, the big news that came out last week was that the Trump administration has revisited the H-1B visa program to try to close some loopholes of abuse. And as a corporate recruiter who has spent a fair amount of time in the tech space where the H-1B visa program is most prevalent, I can speak with some degree of direct experience here on why companies use the H-1B visa program, how it's supposed to work, and how some of the abuse is happening. And as I've dug into the details more, I actually uncovered some fairly uncomfortable truths about how it's actually been abused. And if you've been in the job search process, some of this is going to relate to you, so you should listen up. So for those of you who aren't familiar, how the H-1B visa program is supposed to work in the United States is that if a company is recruiting a specific role, and the role is considered to be unique and hard to fill, and they don't have a population of qualified candidates in the United States that they can reasonably attract and hire, then they're able to go outside of the four walls of the country and go look in the international market and then basically sponsor somebody, which has its own processing costs and all this kind of stuff, and then basically bring them over on this visa so that they can work and fill these roles. And the company is supposed to do its due diligence to make every reasonable attempt to find somebody in the United States who can fill this position first before they go off and find somebody internationally. Now, in practice, what this means is that if we have a very hard to fill position that has a very unique skill set and we can't find it locally, oftentimes one of the questions will be, can we look outside the United States? Because when we publish a position, especially in the tech world, but in other job types as well, we will get a lot of international candidates. And in some cases, some international candidates will actually have the skill set that we're looking for. But usually the first question they'll ask the hiring team is, do you want to sponsor the role, or would you be open to sponsoring the role if we can't find it locally? So we won't even present those candidates, and I'm talking about an internal recruiter here, not an external headhunter, but the internal recruiting teams won't even present those candidates to the hiring manager unless A, they've agreed to it because there's a cost associated with it, and the process is really long, and it's not guaranteed that you're going to actually get the visa at the end. There's like a lottery system and all this stuff. But basically, we'll go through the traditional recruiting and try to find candidates locally. Then if we find a candidate and we can't get the position filled in any other way, then they'll go off and decide whether or not they want to go through the cost and expense and the time, because you have to get attorneys involved and all this stuff. So it's really complicated and convoluted. And most normal companies don't want to use the H-1B program because it is expensive and it's time consuming. And again, there's not a guarantee that it's going to work out. So you could be working temporarily and not have this approval. And then at the end of it, the government could say you're not approved for the visa, and then the person has to leave immediately and can no longer work for the company doing any of this work that they've already been working on. So if they've built up some sort of project knowledge or something, basically you lose it all. So there's a risk there. Now, obviously, one of the reasons why companies will go outside of the country is that they can find skill sets that maybe aren't as readily available. That's kind of the obvious really the intention of the H-1B program. But a more sinister side of it, and this isn't surprising, is that it tends to be cheaper labor. For example, I worked for a small technology company at one point, and they did not want to hire American-based people because they felt, this is the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, felt that American candidates were overpaid and didn't have as much skill or competency as the international people that he was an international guy himself. He was a founder that was he lived outside of the country, but he moved to the United States, but he had a bias for people who lived outside of the United States, let's just say. So his hiring, although it wasn't done through H1Bs, was all done through contracted employees set up through basically like a shell company that payrolled people internationally. And it was kind of a convoluted process. This CTO could hire somebody at 50% the rate, maybe even less than that he could pay the American counterpart, and would get all this productivity because they were just like happy to have this job. But a lot of companies, including some very big ones like Amazon, Microsoft, LinkedIn, there's a few of them that are more notorious for this than others. They will run these ads for these positions. All the while, they already know that they're going to hire somebody through a third-party contracted service that sits offshore because they know they can get the job filled cheaper. Or they have this person in the wings. They've already identified them. It's a friend of a friend who's already an H1B. They're bringing in their own buddies. And it's like these kind of like, it's almost like a little incestuous pockets that kind of infiltrate into certain parts of companies. And then they basically will run these ads for wages way below what the market would pay in the United States. And then say, we couldn't find anybody, so we have to go off and run an H1B for this. And if you've ever run into overly aggressive Indian recruiters who you never hear back from after they interview you, that's essentially what they're doing. They're trying to prove that they looked for somebody but couldn't find anybody qualified. These activities that they're doing are essentially a scam. So if you run into an Indian recruiting company, I would probably just completely avoid it, because you're probably, A, you're wasting your time. B, they're probably only interviewing you so that they can get one of their own people into the process, because they can then prove to the government, we've used the H1, or we tried to find somebody locally and we couldn't do it, so we have to put our own person in. But there are a lot of companies out there who are happy to do this because it saves them a lot of labor costs. And especially after like COVID happened, all the people were working remotely. They basically removed a bunch of positions. And then what they're doing is they're sending all these jobs like offshore. So that's what's really happening behind the scenes. A lot of these positions are being offshored conveniently. They might have a huge layoff. They're not actually laying all these positions off. They're actually sending a lot of them overseas, because then they can get the labor at 30, 40, 50% cheaper. And if you're a company like Amazon, for example, or any big tech firm who has these huge salaries, these Bay Area salaries, and you can pay a person to produce a reasonable amount of work for, half or less than half, it's a kind of from their perspective, it's kind of a no-brainer. And I'm going to take a pause here and introduce today's sponsor, because if you're applying to all these different jobs, especially these low quality or these ghost jobs, oftentimes your personal information is being made available for resale. And what happens is a lot of these unscrupulous companies, potentially even legit companies who are running your background checks, are taking your information and using a third party to conduct them. Those third party background check companies have been known to make your information available for resale to data brokers. And then the data brokers take all of your information, your addresses, your phone numbers, your email addresses, potentially even salary history, potentially even social security numbers, some really personal stuff, and then making it available for anybody who wants to buy it. Now, trying to get rid of that information is really difficult. You have to figure out where it even is showing up, and then you have to go and do the opt-outs and all that stuff, and it's a real pain in the butt. Fortunately, DeleteMe offers a solution for that makes it pretty seamless and painless. And getting started is really easy. You have to provide a little bit of personal information so they know what to look for, but then DeleteMe gets hard at work looking for these instances where your information is showing up, and then they take proactive steps to opt you out of it and get it scrubbed off the internet for you. And every so often you receive a detailed privacy report in your email that will tell you what activities they're doing, where they're finding your information, how many of them have been removed, etc. So it's just a little added peace of mind to know that your information is safe, especially when you're doing a lot of applications. It's just too much personal information going out there. Now, if you'd like to get started, they've been very gracious to offer a 20% off discount if you use the code layoff at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/layoff, or you can use the QR code on the screen. Now, full disclosure, I found a lot of this information on the Gateway Pundit, who published an article about this recently. So some of the data that they've provided is pretty staggering. So apparently in 2025, there was 600,000 applications pending approvals. And the companies who had the most applications, well, let's see, that's Amazon filing 10,000, almost 11,000 labor conditions applications in 2024, leading to nearly all of them being approved in 2025. And the White House cited similar patterns, noticing that one firm was approved for more than 5,000 H-1B visas in 2025. And listen to this, while laying off 15,000 workers at the same time. So they laid off 15,000 people. At the same time, they replaced them with 5,000 H-1B visa applications. Now, doesn't mean that they're necessarily all getting approved now. Again, and then there was another one that cut 2,400 staff in Oregon while securing nearly 1,700 approvals. So they cut 2,400 US-based people in exchange for 17,000 or 1,700 H-1B visa applications. So Amazon and Microsoft, Apple, Meta, JP Morgan, Chase were all the companies who made up the tops of these lists of them having the most H-1B visas out there. So basically what's happening is the Trump administration is trying to close the loophole here by putting a $100,000 application fee for every person. Now, this isn't part of the renewal process or anything. That's just new applications. But what that's trying to do is crack down on the numbers of companies who are abusing this system. Now, it is a double-edged sword. Obviously, we don't want jobs in the United States going overseas, especially when they're undercutting us, because that's happened so much over the last several decades. And that's probably the biggest threat to the U.S. labor market, especially high-paying jobs. They're getting shipped overseas, and companies are joyfully looking at ways to get rid of their existing employee base, the layoffs that we've been talking about so much on this channel, sending them overseas, and then also supplementing them, with AI and all the stuff that we've been talking about on this channel as well. But there is a double-edged sword here. You have some small companies who actually legitimately need the H-1B program because they can't find certain people. I remember working in the automotive space where we were hiring for a very specific role inside of the connected car realm. So it was a PhD scientist in semiconductors, and there was only like maybe 5,000 total people in the world that had these competencies or skill sets, and they were very, very difficult roles to fill. And we almost exclusively had to use H-1B because there was just nobody, there was literally no candidates in the United States. We actually wanted to hire somebody in the United States, but we almost always had the sponsor for that particular role. But if you're wondering what the deal is with ghost jobs, this is a big part of it. These third-party shell companies with these really aggressive offshore recruiters who contact you aggressively trying to get you to interview, don't even seem like they've read your resume, don't even seem like they care about what's on your resume, and then they check a few boxes, then they hang up with you, you never hear back from them again. That's what they're doing. So they're basically just checking off boxes so that they can get somebody of their own through an H-1B and say, well, we tried to hire an American. So I do think that there is some potential good to this, but we also have to consider that there's a negative impact as well. And it's like, how is this going to long-term affect the overall job market? I guess there still remains to be seen. And if you're somebody that's a legitimate H-1B candidate who is hearing this and thinking like, oh crap, this is going to ruin a thing, it really all boils down to make sure that you have a differentiated skill set that nobody else does, or it's very unique. Because that's the best way to get an H-1B legitimately approved and gone through the system, and not having to game things and going through these shell companies that are basically like being shady. It's basically that's the only way I can really describe it. But it's going to get harder to get the H-1B visa without a doubt. There's going to be companies that would maybe have opted to do it that now aren't, which is the purpose of it, to protect the American worker. So, I mean, us Americans, we are happy to see that. But I know that there are people that I've talked to in my own coaching practice that are trying to get to the United States for legitimate and valid reasons. And the advice stays the same. Focus on becoming as unique and differentiated as you can. If you just do the same thing as everybody else in that market, you have the same resume as everybody else, it's going to be nearly impossible for you to get the H-1B at this point. So, and if you're somebody that is trying to compete with these offshoring, this might be a sign of things that potentially could change. I don't think that offshoring is going to change until they start to put some guidelines and some guardrails on how companies can move roles offshore, and if there's any kind of financial implications there. And so I'm going to continue to watch the markets, see what comes out of the administration, and we'll pay attention to this as it evolves. So what are your thoughts? Do you feel that this fee is a good thing for the job market, a bad thing for the job market? And have you ever been contacted by these really aggressive third-party overseas recruiters? And what was your experience with them? Leave a comment and let me know. But anyway, that's what I got for you today. Hopefully you found value in this video. And like always, appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.